Albatross is a decently well-used character in maps. There's around 7 maps around him, which is more than Cricket has. However, a lot of them are about his later life, which is his relationship with Fathom in the Massacre. But what early in life shaped his path? Why did he act the way he did around Fathom? And what caused him to commit the massacre? Today, we are going Albatross's early life, and how his name informed his story. Before we get started, if you are new to this channel, please think about subscribing. I regularly post both Wings of Fire and Warrior Cats content, so you'll never be bored. And to my current subscribers, thank you so much for supporting me. I wouldn't have gone here without y'all. Also, it's my birthday coming up, so if you subscribe, that's a gift from me, and it's cheaper than getting a present, and if you're already subscribed, you're of course invited to my birthday party. Firstly, what caused him to be an animus? There is a popular fan theory that he's part IceWing due to his pale scales, and he got his animus heritage from them. But Anemone also grew into pale scales as she aged, and she isn't part IceWing, we know that for certain. So maybe it's just an animus trait. It has also been never confirmed that this is true, nor denied. So make that what you will. Now let's get to what we know about Albatross's story. He is a prince, and grew up with his sisters Sapphire and Lagoon, who bullied him. At the time, animus magic was not a trait observed outside the IceWing and possibly the Skywing tribes, so no one knew the signs to look out for. Because the first time he used animus magic was pretty traumatic for all parties involved. He was playing with clamshells, and his sister stole them from him. In a state of rage, he ordered the shells to bite all the claws off Sapphire, and they did so. Sapphire was driven mad from the trauma. I mean, who wouldn't be? Having an inanimate object suddenly attack you would be pretty terrifying. This left the throne secured for Lagoon. When she officially became queen, Albatross became her animus. It is mentioned that for all those years that he served as her animus, Lagoon continually held the incident with Sapphire over his head to make him do her bidding. At some point, he had a wife and had dragonettes with her. However, she tragically died and he never remarried, much to the chagrin of Lagoon, who wanted more animus dragons in the tribe. Many years later, he had a grandson named Fathom. Let's jump to his Talons of Power test. There was another splash behind them, and Fathom found himself holding his breath as a new dragon stalked up the beach to join the queen. It was him, the most respected dragon in the Seawing tribe, second in power only to the queen, Fathom's grandfather, Albatross. Albatross was from the same hatching as his sister, Queen Lagoon, but he was nearly a neck length taller than her, with long wings that swept majestically across the sand. His heels were bluish-gray, but so pale in places that they looked almost white, while his eyes were blue so dark they were nearly black. In fact, his coloring was somewhat similar to the seagull, which had now retreated to the safer vantage point of a palm tree. His expression, too, was as suspicious as the seagull's. He looked down his long, hooked snout to the dragonettes. Based off of Fathom's reaction here, we can assume a lot about Albatross. Firstly, he doesn't really talk to his own dragonettes, or really any other dragon. He's very closed off and is described as looking down to dragonettes, perhaps because he doesn't consider them on his level as an animus, or maybe it is because Lagoon keeps him away from other dragons, or maybe because he's an introvert. I feel like the fandom assumes that Albatross was always a jovial grandfather, and portrays him as such, but this passage proves that he wasn't. He was kind yet distant, and only opened up after Fathom was proven to be an animus. Albatross then questions the Talons of Power ceremony. Albatross flinched, just slightly. He cast a skeptical eye across the young dragons. My power is more than enough for whatever you need. I've given you everything you've asked for, haven't I? And I don't want an apprentice. Lagoon coiled her tail and bared her fangs. Suddenly, she did not seem smaller than Albatross at all. Fathom dug his talons into the warm sand, trying not to shiver. You are done complaining about this, she hissed. The animus tests will continue. We will administer them whenever I tell you to. You will train any dragonette we find with powers like yours, and you will never question my decisions again. There was a long pause, and then Albatross bowed his head. Yes, your majesty. He folded his wings and paced down the line of dragonettes, avoiding everyone's gaze. Some of you may have heard of animus magic. We can see a root of some of Albatross's later actions here. He feels like he's done everything for his tribe, and yet he's still getting rejected by his sister and then told off like a child. In the end, he backs down, but he doesn't back down forever. Then the moment you have all been waiting for finally happens. Fathom enchants the coconut to hit Albatross. Let's examine Albatross's reaction. Fine. Fathom held the coconut a bit higher and gave it a stern royal glare, as imposing as his great aunts, trying to make Indigo laugh. Coconut, listen up! I command you to fly across this beach and strike my grandfather! The coconut shot out of his talons so fast that Fathom stumbled forward, thinking he dropped it. He let out a yelp of surprise, but it was not enough warning for Albatross, whose eyes were on the queen. Fathom's coconut smashed into his grandfather's chest, hard enough to knock him backwards, his wings flying out, sand blasting in all directions like waves. Silence dropped over the beach. Fathom had never known it was possible to feel this elated and this terrified at the same time. He wished he could dive into the ocean and scream at the top of his lungs, but he couldn't move a single muscle. Whoa, Indigo breathed. Albatross slowly rolled to his feet, struggling against the sucking, shifting white sand. He shook out his wings and stood up, wincing. He suddenly looked a lot older than he had before. Without looking at the dragonette or the queen, he carefully picked up the coconut that had attacked him, stared at it for a moment, and then held it close to his chest. Fathom thought he could hear tiny crunching sounds. Had he cracked grandfather's ribs? Was Albatross using the coconut to heal himself? Was he in the worst trouble he'd ever been in? Finally, Albatross looked up. Who did that? He asked. Queen Lagoon swiveled her head, staring down the line of dragonettes until she came to Fathom's empty claws. Fathom hunched his shoulders and saw that Pearl was pointing at him. "It was my brother," she said. "Fathom's an animus." "Leaping barracudas," Indigo said to him. "I can't believe you never told me." "I didn't know," he protested. "I had no idea." Frankly, it never occurred to him to give orders to inanimate objects before. "Prince Fathom," said the queen, stepping towards him with a glittering smile. "How perfectly wonderful. You are going to do such important things for your tribe." Fathom held out his talons and stared at them. "I'm an animus, the rarest of all dragons. Me! I am special after all. I have magic like no other dragon in this kingdom of sea. Except one." He looked up and met his grandfather's eyes. "Yes," said Albatross, smiling. "What's happy news?" Behind him, out of view of the other dragons, a vine curled slowly out of the jungle and wrapped itself around the seagull's throat. Fathom watched, transfixed, as the bird was strangled to death without a sound. Albatross patted Fathom on the shoulder, his face calm and friendly. "Another animus in the tribe," he said. "I am so very, very pleased." Albatross takes a minute to react to the attack by the coconut. He stares at it and is described as looking older, possibly as he realizes that a fear of his has been realized. The cracking sound Fathom hears is Albatross crushing the coconut in his claws from that. Albatross likely doesn't want another animus dragon in the tribe, because he feels like his sister will want to replace him. He is getting to be old and can't do the things that he used to that a younger dragon can. He knows now that Fathom is that younger dragon. Though he seems to be happy, it's clearly artificial. His face is calm and friendly, but he is clearly angry as he strangles a bird using animus magic in the background. For their first day of training, Albatross meets Fathom at the Sunset Beach, the beach where parties take place. He's described to be sinking into the sand, even though he doesn't seem to realize it, a clear commentary on the state of his soul. Albatross then takes Fathom to the still under construction summer palace for his first day of animus training. Fathom initially dislikes the structure, but is impressed upon seeing the designs. When he asks how long it has been growing for, Albatross replies 7 years. Fathom thinks this is because he may have not specified how long the palace would take to grow, but I think this is because Albatross wanted to still appear useful to Lagoon without using too much of his magic. It was the perfect in-between, something impressive and tangible, but slow growing, so she would need to keep him around to supervise it. Albatross then tells Fathom about his first enchantment. I feel like the way he describes it is very telling. He describes his sister's actions as normal teasing, even though it goes way beyond that, and even Fathom notes so. This may be from gaslighting due to how many times Lagoonists told him that everything was his fault. Strangely enough, he makes fun of his sister in the same way she made fun of him, calling her a feeble old duck, which to be honest is poetic justice, but you think that he would show some remorse. At least he has spared her from seeing him ever again. Despite that, he does seem to be genuinely sorrowful and previously flinched when this incident was mentioned, showing that it was definitely a sore point for him and traumatic, even if he doesn't particularly feel any sympathy for his sister. Afterwards, Fathom asks if he can enchant something for Albatross, but before he gets a chance to do so, Albatross says that they should leave. This is likely an attempt to stop him from practicing his animus magic, so he won't be well trained enough to replace him. Throughout the encounter, Albatross is warned to Fathom. He's a bit thrilled to meet another animus finally, despite how he feels like he will be replaced by him. He's been shut in a period of isolation for so long, he can't help but like him. His behavior changes completely when Indigo is found. He's closed off and distrustful, and feels a bit like his trust has been violated by his fellow animus. Months later, he still restricts Fathom from doing spells such as enchanting from a longer distance in his head. Which brings us to the Massacre. The Summer Palace is almost completed. Fathom helped on some parts, but he says that Albatross changed so much about his designs, he could barely recognize them. He also said that Albatross appeared tired. Maybe because he realized this could be his last project. Albatross approaches the Queen and is described as slithering out of the shadows. And then... oh, Indigo gave him a curious sideways glance, but didn't say any more because now most of the terrace had fallen silent. Only some of the more elderly cousins kept on talking, a murmur over by the musicians. Albatross was still pacing slowly towards the Queen. "Here's our first animus," Queen Lagoon said to the Skywings, who seemed to have figured that out themselves, judging by the look of terror on their faces. "My brother Albatross. We were just talking this morning about what his next project should be. I'm thinking big this time. Something that makes me invulnerable, perhaps. Or something that kills any dragon who may be a threat to me." Beyond Albatross, over by the couches, Splash stiffened, and Fathom saw her crush one of the hibiscus blossoms between her claws. He glanced around and saw that his father put a protective wing around Manta, who'd gone pale. "Yes," Albatross said. "Although you might recall I wasn't exactly enthused about those ideas." "Then it's lucky you're not my only animus dragon," Queen Lagoon said coldly. Fathom felt a shiver all the way down to the tip of his tail. If she asked him to do a spell like that, would he? Would he obey his queen and put his own mother in danger? Or disobey her, and perhaps put everyone he cared about in worse danger? What would she do to Indigo if I ever said no to her? Albatross stopped right in front of the Queen, snapped a snap with her. Fathom couldn't read his face. He looked as though he had been carved from stone. Any emotions chipped away. "Do you think you're done?" Queen Lagoon said to him softly. "Do you think you're ever going to be done atoning for what you did to Sapphire? It's not going to end, Albatross. You'll always be mine." Something clinked in the background, and Fathom turned, thinking he'd seen a flash of silver in the air, and then a line of red sliced slowly, darkly, murderously across Queen Lagoon's throat like the widest smile in the world. She blinked at her brother in surprise and lifted one talon to her neck. Her last words were, "But I'm the Queen!" And then her body fell in slow motion, legs crumpling, wings crashing down, head landing with a splash in the fountain. Clouds of blood spilled out, turning the water red and black. The Queen of the Sea Wings was dead, and her animus, Fathom's grandfather, was holding the knife. Albatross was already on the edge going into this, and I think he'd prepared for what he was going to do. And when she actually said that, confirmed the suspicions he had all along, he finally snapped. When he turns on the other dragons besides the Queen, Fathom is confused, but Indigo urges him to move. She's smart and realizes that Fathom possibly replacing Albatross is what caused this, so he's certainly on the kill list. He's right as Albatross hunts him down, and has a dramatic villain monologue that explains his motives perfectly. "Grandson." This littered around the room like smoke, hiding like a nervous hermit crab. Interesting choice. One I should have expected, though, from such a little dragonette with such a limited imagination. Albatross paced slowly closer. Indigo's trembling stilled and she took in a deep breath. "You may be wondering why you're still alive," Albatross said, "especially when your entire family's dead." "No," Fathom thought, drums beating misery through his head. "No, they can't be. No! You know I could easily kill you from a distance. It would barely take a thought. But you've been such a thorn in my side the last few years. Every chance you got, I don't really need you anymore. Perhaps Fathom will be better at this than you are. You're so expendable now that I have a replacement. What a pathetic creature you are, little brother, with your tiny teeth and oddly colored scales. Fathom is so much more presentable than you." Albatross growled in the back of his throat. "So no, I couldn't dispose of you from afar. That wouldn't be satisfying at all. I want to see your face as you die." The boat flew away from them as Albatross ripped it off the wall and flung it across the room. It landed with a crash that shook the whole pavilion. At the same moment, Indigo uncoiled and sprang at Albatross. Her front claws sank into his neck, and her back claws dug at his chest, while her wings flared up to blind him. "Fathom, get out of here!" she screamed. "She's gonna die for me!" Albatross roared, a sound of pure rage and hatred. "She's gonna die!" Fathom would never let that happen. He was on his feet suddenly, stretching one talon out towards the ceiling. He couldn't touch them, but he felt the power surging through his claws, and he leaned into it. "Spears!" he shouted. "Kill my grandfather!" The fishing spears wrenched themselves off the wall and shot towards Albatross. "No!" Albatross yelled. "Spears!" Indigo seized his snout, smothering his words, and bit down hard on his ear. A spear smashed into Albatross' back. He dragged the pearls around Indigo's neck and twisted as she let go of him with a strangled yelp of pain. One of his claws sliced across her neck, and the second spear slammed into his side. both dragons collapsed on the floor. Albatross was right in the end. He was going to be replaced by Fathom under Lagoon, and then Fathom replaced him as the tribe's animus when he died. Before he was an animus, Albatross was ruled over by his sisters. Albatross discovers his abilities in the worst way ever, a traumatizing accident that permanently changed one of his sisters. Despite his newfound power, which was incredible, he wasn't able to rise in station. Lagoon held the accident over his head so many times, and every single time it emotionally affected him, keeping him under her talons. Even though he sacrificed his life for his tribe and their well-being, he still felt insecure on the inside, the way he felt back when he was a dragonette. Until when Fathom came along, it drove him further into his beliefs. Despite that, he was overwhelmingly friendly, because he finally had another animus to talk to, possibly someone who understood him. Lagoon's final comment only proved to him that he was being replaced, and that was what finally caused him to snap, realizing no matter what he did, he would always be defined by Sapphire's scar in one single moment in his life. Instead of being known for that, he took his fate into his own hands and made himself defined by something else instead, the Massacre. Let's go over his name now. An albatross is a seabird. The name also means a mental burden, something that alludes to the rhyme of the ancient mariner. In that story, a ship gets stuck in the ice in a narrow passage, but an albatross guides them out of it. Though the bird is praised by the rest of the crew, the protagonist shoots it for food. Angry spirits speak their revenge on the crew and lead them to water where no wind blows, so they are stuck at sea. The crew blames their bad luck on the protagonist, who's made to wear the dead albatross around his neck as a sign of shame. Death and a woman then play dice on the ship, and determine the entire crew should die, but the protagonist should face a fate worse than death for his transgressions. The crew slowly begins to die, and the protagonist bends down to observe the fish in the water, and the albatross slips from its neck. A storm then comes in and blows the ship back to land. The protagonist, initially mistaken for the devil, sets foot on land for the first time in a long while and realizes this is his fate, to walk the earth and warn others against his poor choices. Albatross's story lines up with the rhyme of the ancient mariner very well. He was in a perilous situation, that being his sister's bullying, and an action he considered mundane for him caused him to get into more trouble, yelling at the shells which bit off Sapphire's claws. The albatross that Albatross wears around his neck could be his pale scales, which are subject to much ridicule by his sisters and sets him out against other dragons. It could also be the weight of power that every animus dragon carries. The guilt of the albatross is the guilt of what he did to his sister. Even though he seems callous about what he did at some parts, being described as dry laughing, that is because it affected his life to such a degree where the trauma became a facet of his being, and his existence is borderline a joke, where the punchline is that he will never be able to get away from what he did. This entire allegory of Albatross in the rhyme of the ancient mariner doesn't line up perfectly though. In the story, the sailor purposely shot down an albatross that had helped the crew. In Wings of Fire, it was his overbearing sisters, and he didn't do it on purpose. Make of that what you will, but one thing is clear. Albatross is a deeply tragic character, and after you look into his motivations, his actions make a bit more sense, even if it does not justify them in any way. If you liked this video, feel free to subscribe. My birthday's coming up, and it's cheaper to subscribe than buying me a gift. I make Wings of Fire and Warcast videos pretty often, and your support would mean a lot to me. And to those who've already subscribed, thank you for your continued support. You are invited to my party, and I wouldn't have gotten here without y'all. That's all. Peace out.